Turkey is a transcontinental power, and while the European side of the country is secure and calm, the situation could not be more different on the Asian side. The collapse of the Sykes-Picot Agreement is disintegrating the territorial borders from within, and in the subsequent vacuum of power, major nations seek to carve their own spheres of influence. All these activities directly and indirectly affect Turkey and determine the country's geopolitical objectives in Asia. My name is Shirvan and welcome to Caspian Report. Although the heartland of the Republic of Turkey surrounds the Sea of Marmara in the west, most of the country, 97% to be exact, occupies the entirety of the Anatolian Peninsula in the east, which separates the Mediterranean and Black Seas. But unlike the Marmara region, Anatolia is a vast and rugged land that lacks navigable rivers. Here, infrastructure projects and commercial enterprises are less cost-effective. The further east of the 36th meridian, the more rugged the terrain becomes and the more expensive economic undertakings grow. And although the peninsula has a long coastline, much of it is smooth. This is great for tourism, but not so much for trade. The lack of deep-sea ports along the Anatolian coastline means that maritime access is limited. There are, of course, exceptions in the regions of Adana and Antalya, but overall, Anatolia is an isolated region. Historically, the geographic outline encouraged security, decentralized governance, and an introvert culture. This is pretty much the opposite of the cosmopolitan Marmara region, but Anatolia does provide certain advantages for Turkey. For one, as a buffer zone, it ensures that no Asian power can threaten the Turkish heartland in the west. So, any foreign military incursion from the Anatolian direction will come at an extraordinary cost that most nations are unwilling to risk. Therefore, maintaining complete control over Anatolia is a top priority for Turkish policymakers. Another advantage Anatolia provides is its access to natural resources. Turkey has no significant hydrocarbon resources, but it possesses an asset that is far more valuable. In one of the world's driest regions, Turkey has an abundance of water. According to hydrological statistics, the Middle East sits at an annual average of 300 cubic meters of water per person. Meanwhile, Turkey has over 3,100 cubic meters of water per person per year. The fact that Turkey has tenfold more water than its immediate neighbors to the south is a long-term advantage in favor of Ankara. More specifically, about 90% of the water that flows through the Euphrates River originates from the Anatolian mountains in Turkey. For the Tigris River, Turkey's share of the water sits at 45%, which is smaller but still significant. These river systems fill the breadbasket of the region that is modern Iraq. However, since Turkey controls the upstream riparian of the Tigris-Euphrates basin, it gives Ankara decisive long-term geopolitical leverage over its southern neighbors. This process is further accelerated by the fact that there are no formal agreements between Iraq, Syria, and Turkey concerning the management of water. Policymakers in Ankara are well aware of this reality. Since the 1960s, Turkey has constructed about 600 dams on both rivers, with another 600 more planned in the next 40 years. Many of these dams are part of the Southeastern Anatolia project, which seeks to boost economic activity in the region, especially in the center of the peninsula, which hosts an arable-rich plateau. But the project is about much more than just producing power and watering crops. It is about geopolitical leverage. By constructing dams, Turkey seeks to reinforce its political, economic, and social influence in the area. This became evident in the 1990s when the country constructed the Ataturk Dam, which is one of the largest dams in existence. Upon completion of the project, Turkey held back the flow of the Euphrates River to fill up the reservoir. The entire process lasted well over a month, and although the Turks had notified their Syrian and Iraqi counterparts beforehand, the downstream nations reacted with anger, to which the then President Özel of Turkey responded by stating that we don't tell the Arabs what to do with their oil, so we don't accept any suggestions from them about what to do with our water. While this statement is valid, it also captures the geopolitical sentiment. The situation is further complicated by the population boom in Iraq, which is set to grow from 38 million in 2017 to 83 million by 2050 and further increase to 163 million by the end of the century. Meanwhile, Syria's population will grow from 18 million in 2017 to 34 million by mid-century and stabilize. As the Arab populations grow, water consumption will increase with it. As such, Syria and Iraq will find themselves increasingly dependent on their northern neighbor for their needs. Upon completion of the remaining 600 dams, Turkey will gain the ability to shape the ecology, demography, economy, and thereby the socio-political affairs of Damascus and Baghdad. Turkey may not have significant sources of oil like Saudi Arabia, and it lacks sophisticated proxy groups that give Iran so much influence. But Ankara's control over the Tigris-Euphrates basin gives the country unparalleled geopolitical leverage. In a way, this is Turkey's nuclear option. And in this reference, the Turks must consider their control over the upstream riparian as a geopolitical objective. Another faction that is upset with Turkey's growing influence in the Tigris-Euphrates basin is the PKK. As a designated terrorist group, the Kurdish PKK has long targeted and attacked the dams in Anatolia. Top PKK members claim that Ankara seeks to utilize its control of the flow of water to undermine the mobility of the PKK. And there is truth in these claims. By flooding some strategic areas, Turkey can restrict the PKK's cross-border movements. Hostilities with the PKK are further complicated by the fact that Turkey is home to about 15 million Kurds who maintain a complex relationship with the central government. For decades, the PKK sought to capitalize on the social tensions, and foreign powers sought to exploit the Turkish PKK conflict to undermine the authority of Ankara. This exposure to outside interference is Turkey's greatest vulnerability. Now, it is unlikely that the territorial integrity of the country will be compromised in the long run. However, as long as the PKK remains active and keeps raiding the Turkish dams along the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, Ankara's total control of the upstream riparian is subverted. This means that the Turkish government must resolve the conflict with the Kurdish militias before it hopes to utilize its water leverage. Besides Turkey's leverage over its southern neighbors, the country also sits in between markets that produce and consume energy. To the west, European nations seek to diversify their energy supplies, for which they currently rely on Russia. Meanwhile, in the east, producers of hydrocarbon energy seek to diversify their routes to European markets. At the present, much of the energy logistics goes by maritime lanes, since east and west are unable to effectively reach one another due to the lack of pipelines. The land route in between the continents goes through Turkey. By taking advantage of its geography, Turkey could transform itself as a regional energy hub, which would further reinforce the country's political leverage throughout the region. The Trans-Anatolian gas pipeline, which seeks to deliver Azerbaijani natural gas to Europe, is the first tangible effort towards this goal. But it's up to Turkish policymakers to find new suppliers and fulfill the country's potential as a focal point for energy. That being said, completing this objective has proven to be exceedingly difficult because much of it depends on the regional political affairs. The existing disputes between the United States, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Iran impair regional economic activities. Turkey will have to find some way to resolve this stalemate if it has any hopes of turning itself into a regional energy hub. East of Anatolia, the mountains fuse into the Lesser and Greater Caucasus Mountains. The latter, as the name implies, is a steep and rugged mountainous terrain that spans from the shores of the Black Sea to the Caspian. The Greater Caucasus Mountains form a nearly impassable barrier, as there are only two main passages through it. The Derbent Pass in the east is a strip of flat terrain by the Azerbaijani coastline, while the Daryal Pass runs from the Georgian capital through the center of the mountains. The flat terrain north of the passages extend into the Russian heartland. Currently, Russia controls the Daryal route and has an understanding with Azerbaijan concerning the Derbent Pass. However, should these passages fall into hostile hands, it would expose the entire Russian core. In a strategic sense, the value of these corridors is second only to Crimea. Any power that seeks to control the Caucasian passages must first establish a foothold in the South Caucasus, which is home to dozens of ethnic groups. By far, the largest group of people are the Azerbaijanis, who happen to share close cultural ties with the Turks. Azerbaijan, located on the western shore of the Caspian Sea, hosts a sizable patchwork of arable land, and the capital is rich in energy resources. Moreover, the country borders Russia in the north and Iran in the south. Any major power that gains a foothold in Azerbaijan would gain the ability to restrain the movements of Russia and Iran and gain access to the abundant volumes of energy resources in the area. For Turkey, Azerbaijan is the gate to this wealth and influence. However, Ankara has no direct land passage to Baku. That route must go through Georgia. Since the fall of the Soviet Union, Turkey has worked to install a financial foothold in the Caucasus, while the governments in Tbilisi and Baku have sought to escape the grasp of Russia. This mutually beneficial relationship has resulted in a number of infrastructure and energy projects that have greatly strengthened Turkey's influence in the area. But despite the advances of Ankara, Moscow still has the upper hand in the Caucasus as it controls the fate of the separatist regions in Georgia and Azerbaijan. This leverage allows the Russians to dictate the political terms and thereby consolidates their control over the Caucasian corridors. However, should Russia's position ever waver, it would be in the interests of Turkey to seize control over the Daryal and Derbent passages, which would give the Turks leverage over the Russians. Further south in the Levant, the situation is equally complicated, but here the geographic elements are not steep enough to create coherent lines of divisions. Ridges along the mountains host a variety of factions. For example, Lebanon is home to dozens of ethnic groups. As a result, the Levant is a web of alliances and coalitions. Major powers have often backed one group against another, but no one has ever truly dominated this area from a distance. It is for this reason that every historical power that once had a presence in the Levant also retreated from it and never looked back. Whether it's the Ottomans, the British, the French, or the Americans, no foreign power is truly interested in sustaining a long-term presence in the Levant. The exception to this is Iran, which seeks to create a corridor to the Mediterranean through Iraq and Syria. Tehran may have the upper hand now, but in the long term, Ankara's advantage over the Tigris-Euphrates basin and the Turkish naval presence in the Mediterranean nullifies the Iranian designs. This explains why Ankara does not perceive Tehran as a threat, and as long as there is no major adversary in the Levant, it does not require Turkey's immediate focus. In this context, much like the Pannonian Plain and Greece in Europe, the Levant is a place that is best left as it is. Turkey's final series of objectives in Asia is to secure assets in the Mediterranean. However, unlike the Black Sea, the Eastern Mediterranean has no fixed points that can tip the balance of power. There are, however, a few noteworthy domains such as the islands of Cyprus and Rhodos. A presence in these islands would provide the Turks with additional security for the Anatolian coastline against an amphibious assault. Cyprus is particularly interesting because it functions like a hub that restrains the mobility of the broader region. For instance, Turkey's physical foothold in the north of the island allows its navy to project power over the thin coastal strips in the Levant. If Ankara were to gain complete control over Cyprus, the Turks would be able to expand their influence well into the Suez region and the Nile Delta in Egypt. Yet the flexible nature of naval influence means that unless all the overseas territories are held, nothing is ever truly secure. Even if somehow all the overseas territories were secured, they would be completely dependent on maritime supply lines. Should one lose an asset, it would expose the entire security network, which is why maritime power fluctuates. This also explains why the Ottoman Empire lost their foothold in Egypt and the Levant within a few decades after it lost Cyprus. So, in the Eastern Mediterranean, Turkey must search for assets that enhances its position relative to the status quo. In general, as a nation in between West and East, North and South, regional disputes and activities often directly and indirectly affect Turkey. As such, the country cannot afford to remain indifferent. It must therefore pursue a proactive policy and secure its geopolitical objectives in Anatolia, the Caucasus, and the Mediterranean. To effectively deal with the challenges on its Asian side, Turkey must expand and modernize its air and land forces, but it also must take care not to pursue goals that outstrip its capabilities. Even though most of Turkey sits on the Asian side, including its capital, the core of the country surrounds the Sea of Marmara in the west, and has a completely different set of objectives which we covered in the European-sided Geopolitics of Turkey. For now, this was a Caspian Report by me, Shirvan. Special thanks to our contributors on Patreon who suggested this topic and gave us the resources to produce it. If you want to support Caspian Report to remain independent and self-sustained, visit patreon.com/Caspian Report and consider joining our crowdfunding network. You can also make one-time anonymous donations by cryptocurrencies. See the screen and the description for our Bitcoin and Ether address. In any case, thank you for your time, take care, and sağ ol.